The MPTF Media Center presents the international premiere podcast of Mystery Theater Audibles, Blackfire, a science fiction fantasy novel written and narrated by Anthony Lawrence, directed and produced by Madeline Smith Lawrence, produced by Jennifer Clymer, sound engineered by Marcus Murrieta.
Chapter 8. I followed Highway 140 into the Nevada desert, my GPS system directing me to the small town of Watson in the Virgin Valley. It was a dusty and remote little eyesore with one gas station, one greasy spoon restaurant, and one parish called St. Mel's. I only had to look at that crumbling old ruin of a church to know it must be one of those isolated spots where the church hierarchy sent its most abusive, embattled priests. I sat there in the car, my mind filled with all the many victims that had accused the church of coddling and hiding abusive priests. All of it had been caused by the church's culture of secrecy and fixation with self-preservation, in which predator priests and the bishops who moved them around rather than turn them in were rarely disciplined. They turned a blind eye. But I wouldn't. No way. Not just for me, but for every kid whose priest made his or her world a living nightmare. It's a long fucking list, believe me. Though pedophile priest scandals had really only been in the public eye since 1980, allegations of abuse dated back to the origins of the church, almost 2,000 years ago. Yeah, I did my homework. From 1960 to 2010, more than 30,000 people in 25 countries have come forward and accused priests of molestation. The scandal has only really become widely known since about 1985, when Father Gilbert Goeth pleaded guilty to 11 cases of sexually abusing children in Lafayette, Louisiana. He served 10 years in prison. Bastard should have served 100. But what became of that kindly priest who made my world, as a 10-year-old boy, hell? The church apparently had sent Father Matus out of the country for a while to let things cool down, and then brought him back home to rot in a dingy little purgatory in the desert. But inside the church, there was only one other clergyman named Father Bates. He was a tiny man with sad eyes, and his breath smelled of cheap wine. He became quite nervous when I let him know I was looking for Father Matus. At first, he was resistant to giving me any information about the other priest, blaming church rules. It finally broke down and revealed that he had only recently informed the diocese in Reno that Father Matus had disappeared. He had no idea where the man had gone or what might have happened to him. Sounded like more bullshit to me, but I kept pressing him and learned that Matus had slept in the church loft. I went up and I searched the musty and wretched little sleeping area of the loft. Discovered a crumpled telegram in a wastebasket. The telegram was addressed to Father Matus, care of St. Mel's Parish, Virgin Valley, Nevada, and appeared to be from a place called the Blackfire Resort, roughly in the same area, and it read, Father John Matus, congratulations. Because you have suffered recent tribulations and you are seeking answers to questions of a personal nature, we are pleased to offer you a wonderful and unique experience that will help you through the difficult days ahead. We can supply answers to your questions, and we will put ourselves out to ensure that all your expectations are met. You have been selected to enjoy 2 weeks at the fabulous Blackfire Resort and Casino in Virgin Valley, Nevada. All expenses will be reimbursed by the resort, and you will be given a marker valued for up to $10,000 in gaming chips. All amenities will be covered, and the spa, golf, tennis, pool, as well as horseback riding, hiking, hot air balloon trips, and other activities will be yours to enjoy free of charge. It will also not be necessary to bring any additional apparel beyond your traveling clothing, as we will be happy to supply all your needs from our luxury shops at no cost to you. Your travel expenses by any means you choose will be covered, And if you choose to drive, we will be pleased to route you by GPS, Google Maps, or other location devices. Our very best regards, the staff of the Blackfire Resort and Casino. It's not too late to alter fate. Talk about bullshit. Some Vegas-style resort is giving a 2-week vacation to this fucking priest who works in a church in some crappy little shithole in the desert. Give me a break. Something was fucked up here, and I had to figure it out. Chapter 9. Jordan whirled through the dense fog after the green Jaguar. It had come from the San Francisco side and was now heading towards Sausalito. There was little traffic this time of night, so it was fairly easy to follow the car despite the fog. The Jag moved through the artist town and ended up parking in front of a particularly fine home on the outskirts. The occupants of the car appeared to be unaware of the young woman on the Harley bike that had followed them all the way home through the fog. Ben Custer got out of the car, opened the trunk, took out 2 suitcases. Elaine Custer carried some other smaller articles up toward the front door of the house. They appeared to have been returning from a trip and entered the house just before Jordan moved slowly up and parked on the street. Jordan left the bike at the curb and walked to the front door of the house and rang the bell. Her face was determined, though she felt apprehensive and more than a little frightened. Of course, it could all be a mistake, but she didn't believe it. She knew what she saw, and now she had to confirm it and face something she could not really get through her head. A woman who was dead had somehow come back to life. How could that be? Cody was dead, and she had come close to dying. She had to know what this meant. Something inside her was driving her to learn the truth. She had to have an answer, any kind of an answer. She rang the bell again and reacted to the sound of someone approaching to open the door. Ben Custer opened the door and regarded Jordan curiously. She looked familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place her. His demeanor also seemed somewhat strange to Jordan. He appeared frightened, as if he had been caught doing something he wouldn't want others to know about. Jordan tried to look past him to catch a glimpse of Elaine, but all she saw were the suitcases on the floor. "Can I help you?" Ben inquired suspiciously. "You've seen me before, haven't you?" Jordan asked, probing for some revelatory response. "I'm sorry, I don't think so." "Your name is Ben Custer, right? And your wife is Elaine?" "Yes," he replied with some uncertainty. "But you've seen me twice. A few minutes ago, on the bridge. But even before that, you saw me in the hospital when your wife died." Ben's face reflected his surprise, which he quickly and somewhat obviously tried to cover up. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I saw you with your wife in the hospital. She had cancer. She died. I saw her dead." His face darkened with fear and outrage. He tried to shut the door in Jordan's face. "Go away, you've got the wrong people." Jordan held the door open, her face becoming desperate and imploring. "Please, I just need to know the truth. Please, I don't mean you any harm. Just tell me the truth." Ben shut the door loudly. Jordan stood there for a long moment. Then the door slowly opened once again, and Elaine stood there beside her husband, regarding Jordan quietly, her eyes sad and gentle. Then she spoke softly and simply. "Go home, Jordan. Just go home and look at your email. It will tell you everything you need to know. Go home and leave us in peace." There was just a second, then Elaine slowly closed the door, leaving Jordan totally shocked and baffled. The woman had used her name. She knew her. She knew who she was. But Elaine had been dead. How could she be here alive? How could she know who Jordan was? What the fuck did she mean about going home and checking her email? Jordan was shaken and completely at a loss to understand what was happening. She started to knock on the door again and then stopped. Fear had turned her nerves to ice, and she suddenly did not want to look at Elaine Custer again. In the back of Jordan's mind was just the slightest spark of a thought that had something to do with the reclamation of the dead back to life. Impossible, she thought. But what if somehow it wasn't? Even though she knew in her heart that it was a ridiculous thought, something was pulling at her, making her mind and body respond to the challenge of the moment. She couldn't resist it. Jordan turned slowly and headed back to her Harley parked at the street. It was only a few minutes to Jordan's apartment on the other side of the small town, but Jordan's mind was burning with confusion as she raced her Harley through the dark streets. She couldn't really believe what was happening. It was like another nightmare, the kind that she had been having ever since Cody's death. It was one thing to see someone you thought was dead walking around, but to have her tell you that the answers to all your questions would come in the form of an email was preposterous. Yet here she was, rushing home to get on her computer. It was imperative. She had to look, to understand, even though she thought it had to be some kind of madness that had taken over her mind. She felt that it was probably more practical for her to check herself into some rehab or mental hospital. Rushing quickly into her apartment, she opened up her laptop and went to her Yahoo Mail page. There was only one email. Opening it up, she stared at the email with more than a little astonishment and skepticism. It was crazy. She couldn't believe what she was reading. But there it was, an invitation to a resort and casino somewhere in the Nevada desert. One minute she was about to end her life by leaping from the Golden Gate Bridge. The next minute she's staring at a dead woman who tells her to come home and look at her email. And now she's invited to some resort in the fucking Virgin Valley in Nevada. Jordan had lived and worked in casinos in Las Vegas. She'd never heard of any Blackfire resort and casino. Okay, so maybe it's a new place away from the Strip and they've got this big promotional thing going on, but she knew how the casinos worked and she'd never heard of anything like this. Because you've suffered a recent loss. What do? Scan the newspaper obits for relatives in grief? It's not too late to alter fate. What the fuck did that mean? The whole thing sounded like bullshit. And what about Elaine Custer? She was dead and now she's alive. What the hell did that have to do with this resort? And why did she tell Jordan to come home and look at her email unless she knew something about it? Had she and her husband been there at the Blackfire resort? Nothing added up. It still sounded and felt like she was in some kind of nightmare. Then something else came to her. The Virgin Valley. Where had she heard that name before? She seemed to remember it from something that had to do with Rafe Dillon. Yes, that was it. The note he had left her that morning when he bailed out on her. Quickly, Jordan rustled through her closet and came up with the purse she had been wearing when she dressed up to go to Rafe's hotel room. She dug into the purse and came up with a crumpled note. Quickly she scanned it, and there it was. I had to leave immediately for the Virgin Valley in Nevada. Was it just a coincidence? Synchronicity? Whatever. It really didn't matter. Or so she tried to tell herself, but it did matter. Something deep inside of her was telling her that it mattered a great deal. Maybe he had been informed that the man he was after had been spotted at the Blackfire resort, and Rafe was there now. Somehow that made it all feel a little better, a little more comforting, a little more real. Real? But how could seeing Elaine Custer alive be real? Answers to questions of a personal nature. Could there really be answers to her questions at this unknown resort? Well, she supposed it was as good a place as any to start. What were her choices? Back to the bridge to off herself without any answers? Somehow this curious enigma seemed to stimulate a new and unexpected motivation to live. She knew one thing that was for sure. The bridge no longer was an option. At least not for now. Not until she got some answers. Chapter 10. I got back into my car, opened my laptop, and Googled Blackfire Resort and Casino. Nothing came up. I tried various combinations with the same results. I was frustrated and confused and was just about to close my computer when a website opened up for the resort that hadn't been there before. It had appeared suddenly, just like that, along with an exact MapQuest location and directions to the resort. I started getting a little more nervous, considering for a moment that maybe I was wrong in jeopardizing my career going rogue, tracking down this rat who still disturbed my dreams after all these years, but it was only for a moment. I brought up the photos of Father Matus that had been taken when he was a suspect in the death of the Boston altar boy. The photo revealed once again that bastard's hawk face. He had been in his 50s, pale with thin lips and cold, ice-blue, watery eyes. I just stared at that face and those eyes and then snapped the laptop closed, checked my service revolver, and started the car. I followed the MapQuest directions and soon saw a large sign along Highway 140 that announced the location of the Blackfire Resort and Casino. Well, I thought the fucking place must actually be here. I turned off the main highway and drove along the unpaved road that appeared to be leading nowhere. But as I drove further along the desert road, I was amazed that the scenery was beginning to change radically. The dirt road was turning into a more sophisticated and well-cared-for paved system that curved through beautiful meadows filled with wildflowers. Meadows in the middle of the fucking desert? I could not believe what I was seeing. Then, all of a sudden, all kinds of crazy shit exploded up ahead of me. Things that should not even be here, but was definitely spread out before me like nothing I'd ever seen in Las Vegas. Chapter 11. With her new helmet on, gleaming under the hot desert sun, Jordan roared down Highway 140 into the Virgin Valley in northern Nevada. She had stopped a number of times at funky inns and greasy spoon burger joints, but she knew that she was now closing in on her destination. Miles back, there had been that huge, ornate sign with golden graphics, which indicated the Blackfire Resort was only a few more miles off the main highway into the desert. But this off-road seemed to go on forever. Jordan couldn't help but wonder how they expected to have a successful resort this far out of the mainstream. It looked like it was in the middle of nowhere. She knew there were resorts some distance from the Strip in Vegas, but they were still accessible, relatively easy to get to. Even the Indian casinos were located in places that could draw large numbers of people. Just like all real estate, it was location, location, location. But this place was so removed as to be almost totally isolated. But she also couldn't stop wondering what she had been wondering the whole trip. Rafe's note had mentioned the Virgin Valley, but it didn't say anything about any resort. Was this his destination? She wasn't sure. Maybe he was heading for any number of different places. There was the resort at Mesquite, or it could have been a desert town someplace. She just didn't know. A sense of apprehension was beginning to rise deep inside her, and several times she had been ready to stop and go back. But something kept moving her onward deep into the desert. Then it suddenly rose up out of the quivering heat like an erupting mirage. It was miasmatic, shimmering and sparkling with glints of reflected sunlight off of what appeared to be old-world Baroque buildings with complex shapes and bold contrasts that shot up into the sky. It was like the Emerald City right out of The Wizard of Oz, but not green and sleek and smooth. There were a myriad of dancing colors off its surfaces and something more Gothic about the shapes. Jordan could hardly believe what she was seeing as she began to smell the refreshing scent of orange and lemon groves, and they emerged all around her as she drove her Harley along a now beautifully paved boulevard through opulent orchards. She was startled and amazed as she drove on, feeling that she might as well be driving through Italy, France, or Germany. She passed arbors with an infinite variety of roses, camellias, and lush flowers of all kinds. There were grand Romanesque sculptured statues and Grecian columns that adorned the roadway that now led her closer toward elegant white buildings with sweeping, irregular Rococo curves, and extravagant ornamentation that appeared more like 17th century ecclesiastical architecture. Jordan could see a range of snow-capped mountains that somehow she hadn't noticed before. They ringed the Virgin Valley and the incredible hidden Shangri-La that seemed to sprawl across vast acres of a wonderland that included more than one palatial hotel and casino. The breathtaking landscape natural surroundings curved around a huge, sparkling blue lake with docks and speedboats, which was framed by numerous tennis courts and a picturesque world-class golf course. In the sky overhead sailed exquisitely painted hot air balloons in a rainbow of colors, with elaborate gondolas hanging below them. Jordan could see well-dressed people inside the gondolas waving to others below as they floated gently in the desert currents of air. Jordan could only stare at the incredible sights, amazed and in total disbelief. She was very familiar with all the wonders of the Vegas Strip, but this outdid them all by far. It was not like the faux quality of the glittering Vegas resorts. This dazzling architecture and landscaping all seemed perfectly real and authentic. Jordan followed the boulevard, which led to the largest hotel building. But the ancient quality was in direct contrast to modern features. The wraparound bonnet of interconnecting concrete trapezoids, a honeycombed cast concrete skin, a glass-enclosed lobby with revolving doors, and the people with electronic and digital Blackberries and cell phones, the exotic automobiles and the helipad with its black and gold helicopter. Over the massive black marble entrance archway, inlaid with glinting mosaics, were the gold-encased digitally electronic words, "Welcome to Blackfire and to the bringer of fate." A young woman stood on the steps of the entrance. Jordan stared at her, stunned into silence. She had never seen a woman who looked like this. She was exquisitely beautiful, with North African Moroccan skin color, noble features, and long, flowing, sun-golden streaked hair. She was dressed in sleek, mode footman's breeches and a frock coat with ruffled violet blouse. She nodded and beckoned with raised diamond-studded hand at Jordan, indicating for her to park her Harley in a special rack. Jordan stared at her for a moment, her uncertainty rising. She had not thought about poetry since Cody's funeral invocation. But now some words again from Dickinson floated into her mind. Baffled for just a day or two, she beckons and the woods start. She nods and all begin. Surely such a country I was never in. Jordan parked the Harley, moved to confront the impossibly beautiful woman who greeted her graciously and emphatically. Her English was perfect, with a slight Arabic accent, and had a refined quality to it, like she might have been educated at Oxford. "Welcome, my dear Jordan. Welcome to Blackfire Resort and Casino. You know me?" "Of course. It is my job to know our guests. At Blackfire, there is no need to check in. My name is Samanya. It means the unknown one. But I am well known here. I am the hotel concierge. It will be my pleasure to introduce you to all of our marvelous amenities and entertainment. Please follow me, and I will show you to a room where you may rest and freshen up. You're probably hungry from your long trip, so you will want to call room service for dinner, all entirely on the house, of course." Jordan was overwhelmed by the beauty, character, and energy of the concierge, yet she still couldn't forget why she had come so far in such a short time to be here. "But I have some things I need to know." "In due time, Jordan. Just be patient. In due time, all your questions will be answered, I promise you. Come along now." Chapter 12. They passed through the massive entrance and revolving doors into the most impressive lobby Jordan had ever seen. It was all glass enclosed, with a vast skylighted ceiling and the most magnificent series of sparkling French Renaissance chandeliers with reflecting colored prisms that created sparkling light throughout the foyer. There were great columns and elaborate fixtures, both classical and modern. Jordan glanced at the people who passed her, appearing to be guests who were arriving and leaving, a surging mix of both average-looking tourist types and elegantly dressed and coiffed elite. Bellmen moved baggage on electric carts in and out of the building. Jordan tried to keep up with Samanya, but the amazing interior kept distracting her gaze. She had taken note of the sophisticated digital slot machines along the sides of the glass walls, but the decor and architecture was awesome. It was mostly of a classical motif, a somewhat curious mix that included a number of huge, ornate, gilt-framed paintings and photos mounted on the glass walls depicting dignitary guests from those years. It hinted at the history of decadence when this strange and exquisite playground was conceived. The largest painting was of a handsome and distinguished man dressed in elegant 30s clothing, with a burnished plate beneath that identified him as Daniel Corinthus. Jordan stared at the face for a moment, captured by the charm of the smile and the strangely sinister aspect of the eyes. Mr. Corinthus built the resort many years ago. He was a financier and patron of the arts. Samanya gestured to a huge and strange-looking device at the center of a fountain next to the painting. Here is one of Mr. Corinthus's oldest and most precious possessions. It is a clepsydra, a time mechanism using flowing water. It is said to have been designed in 250 BC by Archimedes. Next to the painting of Corinthus was a large and impressive fountain of rock and tile, the water of which flowed through the ancient and elaborate water clock. It was over 30 feet tall, made up of stone vessels with sloping sides that allowed the flowing of fountain water to drip at a constant rate, and a complex platform of intricate gears that displayed the planets and moon orbiting. Jordan wasn't sure just why the clock had an ominous look, but there was a certain quality that seemed to match the menacing mien of the man in the painting. But something else commanded Jordan's full attention moments later and made her stop and stare in wonder. It was the incredible 16th century tapestry that covered the entire vast wall space at the far end of the lobby and foyer. It depicted a group of young women from European mythology, divinities the Hellenes knew as the Moirae. There were 4 women dressed in long, flowing robes, 3 of them standing on top of the 4th that was lying supine beneath their feet. Samanya also stopped respectfully, both women staring upward, dwarfed by the size and magnificence of the tapestry. "Beautiful, aren't they?" she noted appreciatively. They were called the Moirae, the Fates. The Greek word moira literally means a part or portion, and by extension one's portion in life or destiny. They control the metaphorical thread of life of every mortal from birth to death. Even the gods feared them. This was a favorite of all Daniel's fine arts and antiquities collection. He felt gambling was all about fate. "With a slight edge to the house," responded Jordan with a somewhat cynical smile. "Oh, there's a rather unique distinction between fate and luck, Jordan," said Samanya as she turned and headed toward a bank of elaborately decorated but very modern elevators. As Jordan followed her, another woman moved from a number of arriving guests. She was average-looking, but her face was quite different from the happy faces of the other guests. Her eyes were dark and hollow, her face haggard and distraught. She got very close to Jordan and whispered in a hoarse voice, "You're new here, aren't you?" Jordan smiled thinly and nodded. The woman spoke again, her voice tinged with fear. "Don't go near 18, she said warningly. Then Samanya reacted and moved the woman away from Jordan, gently but firmly. The woman appeared frightened of Samanya and ran off, disappearing into the crowd. Jordan watched her go, then turned to Samanya as they approached the elevator. "What was that about?" "Probably too much roulette." Samanya smiled at Jordan wryly, then ushered her into the elevator. Jordan noticed that it was a one-way elevator, only going up. Samanya pressed a button, and they soon arrived at the 6th floor. Jordan followed Samanya into an enormous and gorgeous corridor to the double doors of number 614, which appeared to be a large suite. But Jordan was unprepared for the luxurious accommodations that greeted her. The suite was extremely large and like stepping directly into the picturesque countryside of the Provence region of southeastern France. It seemed to be the interior of an authentic countryside French chateau, with natural woods and weathered stone, more mellow than vibrant. There was iron wall decor, pottery accessories, old-world artwork, and large hand-painted furniture in the expansive rooms with tall ceilings. There was a huge hand-painted armoire, wood islands, glass candle holders, and an enormous, unique scrolled iron mirror, arched floor-to-ceiling windows, and stone flooring. There were pots of greenery, large glass vases with assorted flowers and oversized woven baskets, one of them filled with various fruits and candies. Of course, there were some other modern touches as well, golden French-style telephones in every room, and wall-screen televisions throughout. Jordan could hardly believe this was where she was to live for 2 weeks, but the most stunning thing of all was the exquisite collection of clothing that was neatly laid out on the bed and chairs, an array of the finest outfits that could be found on New York's Fifth Avenue or Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. There were choices for every sort of event or activity that Jordan could imagine. Cocktail dresses and sheer evening gowns, different colored slack outfits for casual wear, riding jeans and breeches for Western or English, tennis shorts and blouses. They were all in her exact sizes. "I hope these things will meet with your satisfaction," said Samanya. Jordan was nearly speechless, started to stammer some question about how they could have known her sizes, but she was stopped as she noticed a beautifully bound leather album on a superb desk that had a gold-embossed name on it. It was her name, Jordan Carroll. She glanced quickly at Samanya, who smiled and gestured for Jordan to examine it. Jordan picked it up slowly and gingerly, unable to quite comprehend its sheer existence with all the other surprises. But the real surprise was when she opened the album to discover that it contained a fairly comprehensive biography of herself with photos of her from childhood to the present. Stunned at what she was seeing, she rifled through the album, then was completely shaken as she came upon a photo of she and Cody on Baker Beach, smiling at the passerby whom she remembered was kind enough to stop and take their picture. But the pain of seeing the photo was too much for Jordan, and she slammed the album shut, a sudden rage overcoming any curiosity she had about the album itself. Samanya was quick to try and dissuade Jordan's obvious grief and anger. "I know this must be difficult for you, and we certainly did not want to upset you. But memories are precious things, and we went to great pains to compile this album for you to have and take with you as a small personal memento. I know you must also be very tired after your long trip here, and you may order anything you'd like to eat, shower, rest. And tomorrow I can show you around and introduce you to all the wonders of Blackfire. We know you will enjoy your stay with us. Good night, Jordan." Samanya started for the door, and Jordan managed to call after her. "One question." "Of course," said Samanya. She turned back and smiled obligingly. "Just one for now. Is a man named Rafe Dillon staying here?" Samanya considered it for a moment, then offered, "I'm sorry, Jordan. There is no guest here by that name." She turned and went out the double doors, closing them silently behind her. Jordan watched her go, and then regarded the strangely beautiful and lavish surroundings. She just sat there for a long moment, trying to get her head around all that had been happening to her. It was nearly impossible. She was tired, hungry, totally overwhelmed by it all. She picked up a telephone, asked for room service, ordered a chef's salad and some coffee. Then she headed for the bathroom, slowly stripping off her clothing as she went. She wasn't sure yet whether she actually liked or hated the inscrutable Samanya, but she was going to do exactly what the woman had suggested: eat, shower, and go to bed. Chapter 13. Jordan's first sensations upon awakening were a sense of darkness and the gentle, glassy slickness of silk sheets. Jordan stirred as she came out of sleep, aware now of something else in the night beyond the huge four-poster bed in which she had gone to sleep. Something had awakened her, something that had disturbed her sleep, and something that seemed to call to her from far away. But it was less the sound of a voice and more like the wind or some other undulating and odd sound of nature. Jordan sat up in bed for a moment, listening as if she might determine the sound for what it was. She couldn't interpret it. It appeared to change and become even less definitive. She slowly got out of the bed and slipped into the silk kimono that she had discovered earlier hanging in the bathroom. She turned on a light and listened again. She couldn't hear anything now. She checked her watch and noted that it was almost 12, midnight. A cold chill swept over her. She shook it off as a normal feeling anyone might have in her new and strange surroundings. She glanced around her, but nothing had changed. It was all as she had discovered it earlier in the evening when Samanya brought her here. It was beautiful and elegant. Then she heard the sound again. Jordan moved closer to the double doors that were the entrance to the suite. She stood for a moment and listened intently. There, she heard it again. It had a curious, deep intonation, but she still could not identify it. But she was aware that it seemed to come at intervals like the chime of some great clock. But the tones were far too separated from each other for it to be a clock chime of some kind. She'd heard enough clocks to know that the intonations of time were tones that came relatively close to each other, yet it still seemed to have come in regular moans. Now, why did she consider that word, moans? But that's what it sounded like, and she had heard 4 of them. One had awakened her, and then there had been 3 more. 5. Jordan unlocked the door and opened it slightly to further define what she had just heard. Her thoughts were racing now. Why was she opening the door? She hated this ominous moment in thriller or horror movies where the female lead does something that everyone watching thinks is a big mistake, but the script says, open the door, so that's what the leading lady is doing. But Jordan knew she wasn't in a movie and there was no script so she could make her own choices. But somehow, she wanted to find out what that noise was and why should she be so apprehensive. It was just a hotel, with many people probably still moving around, going to the casinos, drinking, having a good time. She continued to open the door and peered out into the corridor. She couldn't see anyone there, and she heard nothing. Pure silence felt strange, but then she was on the 6th floor, and the people would probably be mostly downstairs in the lobby and the bars and casinos. She thought maybe she could get dressed, just go down and have a drink and look around. But something was compelling her to keep going. Keep going. Now, it was like she was obsessed to discover the source of that sound. 6. It was indeed a moan, yet discordant and eerily non-human, like some otherworldly polyphonic musical instrument. It was an ephemeral, distant chord filled with a kind of human-like mix of agony and ecstasy. Jordan was drawn to it, intoxicated by it, as she walked slowly down the long corridor. There was nothing else to be heard, but she felt that she had to anticipate and discover the next chord to find its source. She moved to the end of the corridor where she saw what appeared to be a one-way down, curving escalator. How could that be, she thought in a moment of clarity. A curving escalator? She'd never seen one of those before, or even heard of one. Not in any of the many hotels she had worked in before. 7. She couldn't stop. She couldn't help herself. The tone, the moan, whatever it was, echoed in her mind and made her even more determined to know what it was. She stepped onto the escalator and found herself moving downward in a large, sweeping movement past other floors. The escalator, with its black stairs and gold railings, descended silently and inexorably toward the lobby. In all the time that it took Jordan to ride the strange device, she never saw any other person. Where were all the other guests? She could see the different levels as the escalator brought her downward, but still no one could be seen. She was alone and riding an impossible curving and moving staircase toward the lobby. She was frightened and uncertain, like in a dream where you wander through bizarre and unfamiliar landscapes, but you accept the alternate reality simply because it is what you are experiencing and you don't have any other choice. 8. Jordan stepped off the moving escalator to find herself standing Pretty close to the center of the vast and exotic lobby foyer, there wasn't another living soul to be seen, not a sign or a sound. She stood there for a long moment, glancing around, fully expecting someone to emerge from a room or a corner or the shadows. But there was no one, not at the front desk, not at the concierge booth, not anywhere. The huge entrance had been full of people earlier when she had arrived. Now there was no sign of anyone. 9. The sound, the tone, the moan was closer now. Not like it was moving closer, but rather that Jordan was somehow closer to the source of the sound. She turned instinctively toward where she thought the sound originated, but she could not yet identify it. She moved slowly toward one of the many casino rooms, half expecting to see people gathered there and playing roulette or blackjack or poker. But the room was empty except for the barren tables and gaming paraphernalia that lay dormant and untouched for the moment. The roulette wheel was still. The cards and chips were inanimate at the small curved counters for blackjack and the green carpeted tables for poker. 10. Jordan whirled away from the empty casino room toward where she thought the last sound had emanated. She moved slowly forward toward the great painting of Mr. Corinthus, reacting to the fact that the eyes in the painting seemed to be staring directly at her with fierce intensity. 11. It was the water clock, the incredibly old and archaic device in the fountain next to Golden's painting. Jordan stared upward at the ancient black pointers, confirming that it was dead on midnight. The Grecian dials surrounded by garlands and figurines converging at the very top. But Jordan couldn't quite believe it was this strange device that could possibly be intoning such a sound and at different intervals. 12. Jordan jumped backward at the sound as the water clock tolled the final intonation. It came from somewhere deep inside the clepsydra, and it was like a dirge. Jordan was frozen, aghast, waiting as if something horrible was about to occur, and not knowing what to expect. She quickly placed the palms of her hands over her ears and shut her eyes tightly as if to shut out whatever horrors might ensue. But nothing happened. The dreadful sound faded away into an echo, then silence, and Jordan slowly opened her eyes and just stood there, breathless, seeming unable to move. Silence. And then another sound emerged from somewhere nearby. This time, very soft and easily recognizable to Jordan. It was the rustling, clicking, and repetitious snap of cards being dealt onto the smooth surface of a poker table. Jordan turned slowly toward the sound that brought both relief and anxiety. What she saw was the entrance to one of the casinos that she hadn't noticed before. But this was obviously no ordinary gaming room. It was huge and guarded by 2 massive double doors. Over the entrance were 2 words ornately carved on a large wooden placard in a design of Gothic-style letters. Table 18. Jordan stared into the room at an enormous poker table like none she had ever seen before. It was ornately carved with gargoyles and Germanic Black Forest mythological figures and appeared ancient beyond description, as if it had stood in some legendary gaming room of a time before King Arthur's court or the Arabian Nights. Within the large semicircle of the table, the plush armrests seemed to be made of some mysterious fabric. Jordan stared at its elegant base, antediluvian formulas carved into its ancient Cori wood. Only one figure could be seen, hunched over the table and dealing authentic pharaoh playing poker cards to what appeared to be invisible opponents. The figure's back was to Jordan, so she could not identify the man. But smoke curled up around his head from the cigar or cigarette he was enjoying as he dealt the cards. Time seemed to stand still for Jordan, and then she froze as the man slowly turned around to look at her. She had known who it was even before he actually turned to her, but she could not believe her senses. Once again, Reality had been turned on its head, and her world appeared to be shaken and completely rearranged. The man smiled at her wickedly, the smoke curling from his lips. It was Stephen Glenn Weber. It was the young man who had tried to rape her and had been killed by Rafe and other members of the FBI. Hello, babe. We've got unfinished business.